Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, April 5th, 2012. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. But this week, the mad fermentationist Michael Tonsmeyer and fellow homebrewer Nathan Zender join us for the second half of tasting their Solera beers. This week, we sample sour beers from an apple brandy barrel. If you're new to homebrewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And our 2012 Brewers Logbooks are still in stock. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. We have a show page on Facebook, a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on the site, too. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone and Android podcast apps on their respective stores. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on the Stitcher app, too. We got a lot to cover this week. First, I want to say that my contribution to the Brew Your Own magazine Basic Brewing Radio collaborative experiment on secondary fermenters is bubbling away. I split a batch of my Belgian amber recipe between 2 glass carboys, and when primary fermentation is complete, I'll transfer one of those into a secondary fermenter to see if there's any difference in doing that. So I hope you're participating in that too. We start off with great news from Wisconsin. The law allowing homebrewers to take homebrew out of their homes and share it with others for contests and tastings and such has been signed. For a recap of the events, we go up to Kyle Clark in Oshkosh. Well, Kyle Clark, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks for having me, James.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We had quite a bit of work to do.
Give us some background. Now, the governor finally signed the law and allowing you guys to unashamedly take your homebrew out of your homes to share it with other people and have contests and have tasting sessions and all that. Give us some background into what went on in with this.
Well, it all started with the Department of Revenue changing their interpretation of the law. The current law just simply stated that we had the right to brew beer and wine at home. That's all it said. And for a long time, essentially since the beginning of homebrew in the 70s, we had the right to transport without a problem. The Department of Revenue changed their interpretation last year, and so therefore it necessitated having formal legislation to make sure that we didn't have to rely on interpretation anymore. So we worked closely. Some of the homebrew groups worked closely with the American Homebrewers Association and drafted our legislation very similar to the legislation that passed a few years ago in Washington State. And so as we went through this process, we managed to get quite a few sponsors to the bill. And as the bill gained momentum, we had more and more representatives and senators here in the state of Wisconsin sign on. There were 2 bills introduced, Senate Bill 395 and Assembly Bill 521 with the exact same text, just to kind of expedite the process. And we started introducing the bill late January. It went through the committee structure in the Senate and was unanimously recommended by committee, and then voted on the floor with 32 people voting for it and 1 voting against it. The one tried to introduce some amendments that would essentially neuter the bill, for lack of a better term. But then it went to the Assembly, and I actually testified in front of the committee that heard the bill in the Assembly. There was a lot of people in the room that day. There was several homebrewers and representatives from several different groups lobbying on behalf of the bill. Both the Tavern League here in Wisconsin and some of the manufacturers and distributors. As the bill gained some strength here, the Wisconsin Brewers Guild, which includes such brewing visionaries as Dan Carey and New Glarus Brewing, came out and While they weren't lobbying on behalf of the bill, they did put on their website that they did support both SB 395 and Assembly Bill 521. And upon the recommendation of some of the committee members, there was some amendments introduced in the Assembly, 2 amendments simply to clarify some language. And once those were concurred, the bill passed the Assembly and then was sent back to the Senate. And believe it or not, this was the last bill heard in the legislative session before adjournment. So we were the last ones to get our stamp from the legislature to be sent to the governor. And this bill does have some language in it that means that it doesn't take effect immediately, but it will take effect just in time for the 4th of July holiday. It takes effect the beginning of the 3rd month after it's published. So that will be July 1st. So for our 4th of July celebrations here in Wisconsin, we'll actually have the opportunity to transport our beer and wine legally.
That's awesome. You got quite the civics lesson. I mean, you were kind enough to keep us updated with weekly updates as the struggle went on. But has this kind of opened your eyes to the workings of government, at least in your state?
It has. I do have a formal degree in political science. I was actually teaching American government before I was laid off. But the details and specifics are something that the nuances that go into this is something that I really gained a new appreciation for. It's one thing to study in a classroom while you're sitting there with a group of peers and writing your master's thesis, but it's another thing to actually see it in practice and the deals that have to happen and the agreements that have to happen and just the nightmare that partisan politics can be in scheduling bills on the floor.
And you're not working in a vacuum up there. You've got quite a bit of, let's say, ancillary stuff going on.
Yeah, we do have some recall elections going on related to the governor's budget bill and among other things that have really generated a very divided atmosphere here in Wisconsin politics. So it's fortunate to see that we were able to come together on something that seems so basic, like guaranteeing homebrewers' rights. And we were very fortunate. Unfortunately, during this process, some of the representatives that supported the bill or were against the bill were involved in some partisan politics related to the recall. But ultimately, common sense won out.
Is there any advice that you would give to homebrewers working on similar legislation in other states?
The biggest thing is be ready to be disappointed at times and celebrate the small victories, because every time that I was contacting a legislator, the number one thing they said was it was refreshing to hear from constituents, not lobbyists. So having people willing to step up and even make a phone call, those phone calls are so short. Most of the representatives I call, you speak with a staffer and you speak to them for about 30 seconds. They're going to ask your name, your address, who your representative is if they are not your representative. And it's super simple. You just say, I support this bill and I would like you to support it as well. And it's that simple. It takes 30 seconds to a minute most of the time. If you're asking a few questions, it may take a little bit longer, but be ready to just contact your representatives and celebrate the small victories, because it's a back and forth. It seems like you're gaining ground, and then it'll seem like you lost all the ground you gained, but then you can gain it back rather quickly. Politics is a fickle business.
So even though you guys didn't have a war chest of money, it was the individual voices from the constituents that seemed to make the difference.
Absolutely. It was one of those that we weren't a well-funded lobbying organization like some of the groups that were lobbying against us, as a matter of fact. But we simply were persistent, and we made known what we felt. The fact that you can get 5 homebrewers to show up to a committee meeting on a Tuesday in the middle of February speaks volumes to them. And so just being involved in government was the biggest thing, I would say. And so if you're proposing homebrew legislation in other states, be persistent, be clear, and let your representatives know why you believe it. I think that was the biggest thing for us, is understanding You know that you need to get the bill done, but here's why we feel it's important. And for us, it was not only our rights, but the possibility of hosting the American Homebrewers Association conference again. That would be something that would be great. It would be a boon to our local tourism business, and highlighting how this can actually create jobs with homebrew stores, and looking at other legislation and simply saying, hey, Washington passed it, Utah passed it. This is something that it's not a flash in the pan. It's a consistent message, and we're seeing this similar legislation passing in other places is something else to highlight for your legislators.
Awesome. Well, congratulations again, Kyle. It's wonderful news, and thank you very much again for keeping us up to date and keeping us posted on all the struggles along the way. And I look forward to one day going to a homebrew conference up there. I think that will be awesome.
I would love it. Absolutely love it. And I thank you for your time, James.
Well, thanks again to Kyle. Kyle says that the passing of the law was definitely a group effort, and that those who helped get out the word and contacted legislators directly really made a difference and made the process work. So congratulations again to everybody involved. Now, if you'll remember, a few weeks ago, we tasted 3 wonderful sour beers from Michael Tonsmeyer and Nathan Zender. They've been playing with barrels and flavoring the beers from them with interesting things. Michael Tonsmeyer and Nathan Zender, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to be here.
And in the studio, we have Andy Sparks.
Great to be here as always.
Steve Wilkes.
Hi, everybody.
And Alex Roberts.
Hey, guys.
Steve was sick last time, so he didn't get to sample the Solera first round.
I know, I feel deprived.
I'm
all better now, and I'm looking forward to this.
Well, maybe you get an extra share this time.
I'm just glad we didn't wait 2 years this time.
Well, it was an act of great restraint to not go ahead and sample the second half the other day, but I'm glad we didn't, because not only because Steve wasn't here, but because at the end of the evening, I think we felt pretty good, and it wasn't we weren't blasted, and we were fairly mature and responsible. So,
and the way we rattle on, it probably would have been a 2-hour show.
I like people that talk. It gives me less to do during a show. I can sit back and relax and sip on the beers. So why don't we go ahead and start pouring, and you guys kind of bring us back up to speed of where we are with these beers.
Sure. So the first round was aged in a wine barrel, and that gave sort of a light, sort of fruity character to the beer, really not too aggressive. This one was aged in a barrel that, for probably 7 or 8 years, was a bourbon barrel. Then it was a apple brandy barrel at Laird's Distilling for probably another 8 or 10 years. Then Mackenzie's Brew House, which is a great little brew pub chain. There's 3 locations, all with the same head brewer, right around Philadelphia, and they put one beer through it, and he thought it had too much apple brandy character for him, so when we were up there brewing a beer with them, we bought it off them.
Yeah, got it for a steal. And they had actually, I think they had gotten it from Keystone Homebrew, which is a homebrew, I guess it's a really amazing homebrew store up there north of Philly, I believe. And I guess they regularly are able to source these apple brandy barrels from Laird's for homebrewers out there who might be interested. You might be able to contact Keystone and get a full-sized, it's a 53-gallon. Yep. It's a repurposed bourbon barrel, like Mike was saying. But yeah, it's they're pretty aggressive. I guess their first pull, so we got the second pull. Yeah. So that's probably toned things down a little bit. But I guess we'll see right now with our tasting experience here.
So were there bugs in with the apple brandy?
I forget if the beer that they put in there first had bugs or not. Most of their barrel-aged beers do.
Yeah, I think they pretty much exclusively use their barrels for doing like mixed fermentation beers.
But then in addition to that, again, we use East Coast yeast. The first one is Bug Farm number 3. This is Bug Farm number 4, which actually includes a weird. It's actually not one of the same species of Brettanomyces that's normally used. Normally, Clausenii anomalus is one strain, and Bruxellensis and Lambicus is another species. And there are various different sort of flavor profiles on there, but there are also Nardensis, Nanus, and Casterianus.
He's a completist. He doesn't know when to stop, and I think sometimes there's just this 30 or 40 different bugs in these.
But this has a strain of Brett which pretty much no one else has played with besides him and people he's given it to. So what are you guys thinking about it?
Yeah, I'm thinking if somebody doesn't know what we're talking about and you name off all those things, it's going to sound like we're, inoculating this with diseases,
Homeland Security just put us to code level orange. I can tell you that this is delicious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
would you guys? You don't drink and say, "Hey, this is absolutely an apple brandy beer," right? That doesn't. Yeah. I get there's honey. It's got a sour tartness to it and acidity.
Yeah, I get peach.
And maybe it's got an apple-y character or a honey-ish kind of character or something.
I get a little bit of apple cider vinegar, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a little sharper kind of thing.
Yeah.
And one thing that we sort of made a mistake on this barrel is that Mackenzie still had about a gallon of beer at the bottom, and we didn't rinse it out or deal with it at all for about a month. And I think
it was smelling pretty vinegary.
It was very vinegary by the time we got in. We rinsed it out and we put Star Sand in there. But once those bugs are down in the wood, there's not much you can do. And so I'm hoping that this time. So normally with barrels you have a little bit of evaporation. They call it the angel share in bourbon making. And some breweries there's a sort of divide. Some breweries will top up their barrels. Some weekly, monthly. Some just when they need it. And we didn't top this up, and so the more headspace you get, the more oxygen that's in there, the more vinegar character you're going to get in your barrel.
And there's a sort of some anxiety with this barrel because when we got it, we were very excited to have an apple brandy barrel, and we got home on brew day. We were putting it into place. We noticed there was sort of a crack in a stave near the bottom.
Yeah.
So we're completely flipping out. We're like, "Are we going to put our beer in here? It's gonna." It's going to just slowly leak away, 50 gallons of beer. And it was a nasty-looking crack, but it turned out... when we put something in,
When we put water in it, the crack was getting wet. And so you could tell that some liquid was getting through, but I guess just having it in there, it swelled up. I put a little bit of keg lube on there. Just to keep that.
I think we had somebody read on the internet somewhere that. But anyway, so yeah.
Okay, now wait a minute. Just hold on a minute. You had a nasty looking crack.
You got keg lube
that was getting wet, and you put some lube in it. And then what happened? When does the bung enter into this?
Lubricant. What's so funny about that?
Anyway, I guess what the takeaway is that even though these things look gnarly, sometimes these barrels that they can sort of survive some of these cracks that But I think we were a bit anxious for a couple of days.
And we actually did, instead of primary fermenting in the barrel, we actually on brew day went into about 7 carboys and put water in there and let it go for about a week. And we were debating driving up to Pennsylvania getting a barrel, or going to get a bourbon barrel instead. Or after a week, it held, and we stuck some wood under it, and it's been more than a year now. It's been fine.
So talk about the base beer again. Remind us: is this the same base beer as the first round?
Yes. So what we want to do is go with a slightly more aggressive beer, so a bigger beer. So this is a few points of alcohol more. I believe it started around 1070, 1065.
We wanted 1070, but I think it was more 1065.
1065. So it's a little bit stronger. And then we were going for sort of a golden into sort of ambery kind of color, just to switch things up a little bit. And we wanted, we know there's going to be more aggressive flavors coming out of that barrel, so we didn't want it to be overwhelmed, a little bit more body maybe.
Yeah, so we put some Munich, some Cara Munich, and then a little bit of honey since we were under gravity just to get us up a little bit more. This has all been sort of, Nathan has had this sort of grand plan to have maybe 2 barrels, maybe 3 barrels, maybe 4, each with sort of a different colored base beer. And eventually maybe we can do some real blending between the barrels and not just sort of Solera within one barrel, but pull 3 gallons of one and 2 gallons of one and half a gallon of another to get a custom sort of.
Yeah, it just sort of opens things up for blending. You know, you got a few different flavors to work with, colors, things like that. Just some variation.
I think that's one of the real keys to doing great blending is having some variation there. I mean, the great lambic blenders like Driefonteinen are buying lambic from different breweries that have slightly different characters, maybe are a little more sour, a little more lemony, or a little funkier, and then that allows them to sort of build up their own character. And if you brew the exact same beer in 5 different carboys, granted, sour beers are going to have a little variation no matter what you do, but introducing maybe a different wood or different microbes or a different base beer really opens up potential.
Yeah, I think this beer smells a little sort of darker, not as bright as the first round to me, and maybe that's because it's got a bigger malt character slightly, but the sourness is still there. Do you guys get any of the apple brandy kind of notes, or what are you guys tasting?
I'm mostly just getting apple, but there is a little bit more of a sweet finish to this.
It's delicious.
It's really good. My first sip and my last sip still remind me a lot of La Folie. It's the first sour beer that I've had that someone has made that hits that same sour note for me that La Folie does. And so if you've had La Folie, then you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say that, but
more vinegar to it than a lot of other sour beers. I think that's probably that a little bit sweeter, a little touch of vinegar. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, and they use a very rustic, old world technique with that beer. You know, where it's all in wood. It's not temperature controlled. You know, it which is very similar to. I mean, our approach is sort of following that same sort of inspiration. So I'm glad that it's hitting on those same notes for you.
Now the first bottle is gone.
Yeah, that was not a challenge at all.
So
you guys were complaining I sent big bottles.
Yes, I'm always never. Well, I wasn't complaining. I was, just for logistic purposes. Let's see.
And so I think we're going to be opening up the dry hop version next.
Yes. Talk about this beer.
So this is exactly the same beer, and this is very similar to the other one. What we've been doing about once a year, or once every 18 months maybe, is taking about 20 gallons out of these barrels and refilling. And what we've been doing with that 20 gallons is we've been doing 5 plain, which we just had, 5 dry hopped. So in this case, 4 ounces of Amarillo hops added just to a carboy with the 5 gallons we pulled out for 2 or 3 weeks.
About 2 weeks, something like that.
Before we bottled. And then we've done 5 gallons on fruit. And sadly, the 5 gallons that we put this beer onto fruit with is still on the fruit. We did blackberries and then mulberries.
Yeah, it was just like it was several pounds of blackberries, maybe like 3 or 4 pounds.
3 or 4 pounds.
And then there was a mulberry tree in my neighborhood, so those were some foraged mulberries that I had grabbed and been frozen. And you've got, I think, a mulberry tree in your backyard, right? So maybe we'll play with some more of that in the future. But this beer, I think, did you guys set aside some of the first beer, or you just drank it all?
Oops.
Right. Yeah. But this, it's sort of, brightens the beer up quite a bit. Brings the nose way up, makes it a little punchier. But we usually try to burn through these bottles first because you got this big, wonderfully aromatic hop that you're working with, the Amarillo, and sometimes that flavor will sort of like tail off and get a little bit old or muddy after several months. So usually these are the first of the bottled ones that we sort of burn through.
And the dry hops also tend to cover up. At least when I have a young sour beer, they often. And Nathan and I describe it different ways. My young sour beers, I say it tastes like Cheerios or Wheaties, or Nathan says maybe it's diacetyl, maybe it's a little buttery.
Yeah.
And dry hops help really to cover that up and make a beer that can be drank as soon as it's carbonated.
Right.
3 or 4 weeks.
And that young flavor ages out usually within 6 months or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you can smell the difference.
Yeah. Oh, right away.
A lot of difference. Goodness. Stripping the enamel off my teeth.
Woo! Boy, wow. The dry hops really accentuate the sourness.
Really?
At least,
I don't on me. I've got them. I still have some of the first one
To,
here.
to me, maybe it's a little more sour, but I don't get the vinegar character that I had before. I get more of that, like, sort of a tangy citrus.
Yeah, for me, it becomes more fruity. It becomes a little bit more tropical.
Tropical.
Yeah, you almost get some of that, like, the bubble yummy kind of, that really sort of.
Yeah. And this beer was sort of inspired by, we were talking about New Belgium earlier, their La Terroir, which is their pale sour beer, dry hopped with Amarillo. And is it just Amarillo or is it Amarillo Cascade?
Yeah, I'm not sure. About that.
But yeah, I mean, sort of the same idea where it's a big, fruity, tropical nose.
So how much hops did you use in 5 gallons?
About 4 ounces.
And that was
pretty aggressive.
Pellets.
Yeah.
Was it? Pellets,
All pellets, yeah.
Wow. What do you think, Andy? You're the resident hophead.
Yeah, the hophead here. I love it. I think this is a real treat. You know, a lot of times with the sour beers, you don't get the hops. You know, the hops are left out because of their ability to kind of keep it from getting nice and tart. But by doing it like this, you know, it's really it's quite a surprise, quite pleasant.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I love Amarillo hops, and this I was thinking that there would be no way that the Amarillo hop character could come through the sourness, but it does. And I think it's slightly, to my palate, and maybe it's because of the added bitterness or added hop character, but it is a more aggressive beer than the first one to me.
I know I've heard that a slight amount of sourness can enhance bitterness, and maybe it's the same thing. I mean, I know dry hops don't really add a lot of bitterness, but it might at least enhance that perception of sourness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe that's it.
I really get a lot of that tropical fruit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the juicy fruit. Is that the gum?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's nice.
And I mean, to me, it seems like such an obvious combination. I mean, either citrusy or tropical. These flavors often are with sour in other contexts, and to have it with a sour beer makes this wonderful sense. But it's something that almost no brewery does. I mean, we were talking last time. Cantillon does a couple. Bullfrog did one.
Yeah, it's still like there's a lot of room to play. I mean, look, all the different hop varietals you could use. You know, you could. I mean, that's something we could do in the future. Is just you break into smaller batches. And breaking off to 1 gallon this, 1 gallon that, and you just seeing what complements what, and where that sort of some of that you get onto the tropical into some of those really weird sort of soury flavors. Like durian and all that kind of stuff. You end up getting some really I'm sure you could hit on some really weird combinations there,
And Brett is actually certain strains are able to make an enzyme that will take some of the compounds in hops and sort of rearrange them into new and unique flavors. I was talking to Chad Jacobson, who runs Crooked Stave and also wrote a master's thesis on Brettanomyces fermentation. And he was saying when he was working at Odell's, they did a dry hop India barley wine that he was getting lime zest and lavender off of these flavors that weren't in the hops, that weren't in the base beer, but that the Brett, he suspected anyway, had sort of rearranged these molecules. The problem, I guess he was saying, is that whatever the compound is, there isn't a whole lot of research that's publicly available on which hops have this, I think it's glucosides, something like that, and which strains of Brett are able to do their thing with these compounds. And so it really is an experimental sort of.
Yeah, and it's that's something that there's an area where like sort of home brewers can really be pushing forward, because a lot of times on these commercial scales, you don't have time and the resource and the balls really sometimes to do all kind of really crazy experimentation. So we'd hope to hear back from, if there are people out there that are listening that are up for trying some of the stuff, we'd love to hear back from them. Find some interesting combinations that work.
And one thing I did on the first wine barrel beer, not the Solera wine barrel, but the Flemish Red we put in a wine barrel at Nathan's house, was I actually just took 3 or 4 whole hop cones, and put them into the bottles at filling. I did a couple of Cascade, homegrown Cascades, an Amarillo, and a Simcoe, and it was
that was
amazing.
A real revelation. Yeah.
And
that sort of like was one of the things that really inspired us to sort of mix in with these, dry hopping, these acidic beers.
Yeah. And the only concern with that, it works beautifully. The flavor transfer is great, but it's a Mentos and Diet Coke kind of thing. When you open the bottle, you have to be ready with a little strainer and with a glass, because it will start foaming almost immediately.
Now, with the acidity of the beer and being in contact with the whole hop cone, I would be concerned that the beer would sort of eat away at the vegetal material and give you kind of over time sort of a vegetal taste.
Definitely. And so when I did that, I did a 6-pack. And so it was great because I could have one for, one a week or whatever while I was waiting for the rest of them to come around. It isn't the sort of thing that you would want to do, say, a whole, case of or even a whole batch of. But it would be a great way, say you just wanted to experiment and you wanted to try, well, what does one hop cone? What is two? What's three? And then after 2 weeks, try them all. Or try maybe just different combinations of hops on, say you have a base IPA recipe you like, but maybe you just want to play, well, how would this be with Simcoe? How would that be with, Nelson Sauvin or whatever sort of maybe a new hop you hadn't used before that you didn't want to commit to.
And then, forget about one of those bottles and then see 6 months later what happens,
Because it might be something really interesting and fun.
Yeah.
You guys ready for number 3 here?
Yeah, and while we're
pretty wacky.
While we're opening that, Andy, you've ordered a barrel.
Yeah, I ordered a barrel online, I guess last week. There was an ad on the NHA site or the American Homebrew site advertising, so I went and checked it out. So I have a little barrel coming, and I do want to kind of make sure I have something straight about your process. Okay, so you were talking about the fact that you had you brewed this into 7 glass carboys, I think, and
it was around there.
Yeah. So when you did that, what yeast did you use in those as the primary yeast, and did you use your blend of yeast, and how did you prep it for doing across 7 carboys, or did you inoculate into the barrel?
So this one that wasn't our plan. But the yeast we used was a combination of, so it was the Bug Farm 4, and it was a yeast cake from, we'd been up at Mackenzie's and we'd brewed this beer Irma with them. Then went into a variety of barrels and got all sorts of sugars and interesting beer. But we had taken home a yeast cake from them that had Saison 2 in it, and we ended up dropping in some bottle dregs from some beers they gave us. I believe we just sort of stirred those cultures up and just sort of eyeballed them into the carboys. Are you thinking of doing a clean beer or a sour beer in your barrel?
Well, the plan is when we get it, it'll be freshly dumped bourbon barrel. So the plan is to start off with maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 3 beers through it that are not sour. So go with maybe an Imperial Stout or maybe a Scots Wee Heavy or something fun like that. And then after I strip it a little bit more, then go ahead and move it into the funk category and use it as a funky barrel.
Yeah, and with you probably noticed that with those smaller barrels, there's so much contact space that you're going to get an amazing amount of character really fast. So just be prepared, to check it every couple of weeks or something like that. You may have your full flavor impact with that first beer in a couple of months. Maybe in a month or two, and then it'll die down every time after that. But they're just with these small barrels, that spirit character can become overwhelming really, really fast. So go in there with a big beer and start tasting it relatively young.
And it wouldn't be a bad idea.
Stay on top of it.
With our other barrels, we try to not leave them empty. The one we transferred out yesterday, I mean, essentially it was. Normally yesterday we got a new bourbon barrel, but normally it's not more than say 2 hours between when that barrel is empty and when it's completely full again.
Yeah.
And so you might want to have whatever your second beer is ready to go in carboys. You can rack them to secondary, rack them to kegs, whatever you want, and just have them ready to go so that when that first beer is ready to come out, you can go right in with the next beer.
And just to prep it, I would definitely, scald that barrel. Like the night before you're going to use it. I would. I mean, you're going to pull out some of the character, but at least it'll be a little more sanitary. You know. I mean, there may be some bugs living in there, so. I mean, you're rolling the dice one way or the other.
With the spirit barrel, you're a lot safer than, say, a wine barrel. That's really where I think you would have to scald if you were doing a clean beer. a spear barrel, particularly if your beer. I mean, I'd almost, even though you don't have the barrel yet, I'd brew the beer. I'd have it ready to go. I'd have it fermented out, and then I would just go in as soon as you could when the barrel arrives.
Now, when you say scald, what do you mean?
Real hot water.
Yeah, 190 degree, or water's put it in there. Just sort of pasteurizing the barrel, sort of. But Mike makes a good point there. With the wine, because of the alcohol content, you would, definitely want to make sure you do that with wine. But with spirits, you'd probably have a little bit of a safety net.
Talk about this beer.
Particularly if it's fresh.
Talk about this beer. What do we got here?
So this is, I think. What year was that the Alpine did the Ichabod beer?
That was 2008.
Yeah, so me and Mike had this beer Ichabod from Alpine Brewing, just outside of San Diego, all these years back, and it was red wine aged pumpkin beer with pumpkin pie spices, sour beer.
So every year,
amazing beer.
So it's called Ichabod. Every year they do a pumpkin beer that's a different style. So they've done pumpkin dunkelweiss, and this was pumpkin sour.
And since then, I think me and Mike have each done our own versions, like inspired version of this beer. And then since then, Mike had actually had some contact with the brewer out there, and sort of gotten some advice about how he had treated, how he had done the pumpkin addition into that beer, and how he did the spicing. So I think we took some of those lessons from him. And this is actually, I guess it's not really pumpkin, it's acorn squash.
Acorn squash,
right?
And I cut them in half, scooped them out, roasted them in the oven until they were nice and brown and toasty, and then we scooped them out and sort of mashed them up, and then that went into the secondary. The issue with this beer is that I had done this butternut squash sour a couple of years ago that was terrific, but I'd add the spices at the end of the boil. I hadn't really gotten much character out of them. I think it was maybe 2 grams of cinnamon, 1 gram of nutmeg. And part of that, I guess, was that the beer had then aged for 18 months or whatever and then was bottled. And so, I mean, spices fade. But this time I said, well, let's double it. That sounds safe. But
right, because we're doing a cold extraction here, right? Okay.
And so we, Nathan was there grating the nutmeg. And after he got through about a whole nutmeg or a nutmeg?
It was like a good, inch-high pile of shavings.
And that was 2 grams of nutmeg. And then he's spooning out 4 grams. I mean, like 6 grams didn't sound like much, but then we dumped it in, and I just sort of looked at it, and I smelled the carboy. And
it was a little scary.
And so what we ended up doing was filling up the carboy so it overran just a little bit, and since the spices were floating, it washed out.
Give some of the... Yeah, so learn from our mistake. Unless you would like the very holiday spicy kind of pumpkin sour.
And part of what that did too, even washing some out after about 3 weeks, it had enough spice character, and we didn't want to leave it any longer. It would have been nice to leave it on there because I don't get much of the squash character.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I really get the cinnamon.
Yeah, I think that, and I get like a dark fruit character, and I don't know if that's just my mind is playing off of the spices, some of those sort of holiday spices, and giving it sort of, some kind of dark kind of fruit character. But what are you guys getting in this beer?
Well, I'm getting pretty much aroma and flavor is pretty dominated by the cinnamon. I'm getting a lot of the cinnamon with a little bit of like licorice in the aroma, but the flavorful profile is definitely cinnamon. I get a little vanilla maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so it could be yolk.
Yeah, I don't know if I get any squash, but it does seem to have a little, maybe a teeny bit more body than the previous two. Maybe that's just my imagination, but I think the spices pair well with the sourness. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think they do too. And what I get is I picked up on your body comment. I think it's more viscous. It's a little kind of slick on my tongue, so it's not as cutting as the ones that were more sour and vinegar in parentheses. And I get, and all the other comments, the cinnamon from Alex, definitely, the vanilla, definitely. It's a nice beer. I don't really get a squash flavor, however.
Right.
So,
and I think that the viscosity may, I think it does well in this beer because just the sour beer on its own can be pretty, tart and astringent, or they can be. and maybe
Yeah, it gives the impression that this one does feel a little bit fuller, doesn't it, than the others?
Yeah. So while it may not be a prominent flavor, I think that it is useful and complementary in the whole mixture. I think it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel out of both shows we've done, this is the least sour of them all. Is way it seems to me.
It's still pretty sour, but
yeah, I think the spices too, just because they're sweet spices, even though it doesn't really add sweetness, it gives a little bit more impression of sweetness.
Yeah, it's funny. It really plays with your perceptions. I think it really like your smell and all that kind of stuff. It starts going in all these different directions, and it's.
Or savory. Would savory be a good adjective?
Yeah.
So we're talking about the body in this beer, right? And I was thinking, that's going to be a difficult thing. I was thinking, wow, this would be really even better if we could pump a little more body into it. How would I do that? Push a little more care pills, make it with some oatmeal, and then I was thinking, well, golly, that would make this a really sour beer, wouldn't it? Because all those things that you would boost body with are just going to make the beer more sour. So how would you do that? How do you drive body up in the beer?
Yeah, you got to think of sort of the Flanders Red tradition, right? Or the modern Flanders Red tradition in Belgium, where places like Rodenbach and beer like the Duchess, things like that, where they're you could pasteurize your beer and you can back sweeten it, something like that, So
or just blend it with a younger, sweeter beer.
Yeah, and so you could. That's something you could play with,
and that's what New Belgium does. All of those sours now these days are flash pasteurized, and so they can blend in some younger beer and have a little bit more body and sweetness than they would otherwise.
And I think that's a little controversial. I was out there this summer. I was talking with Eric, who sort of runs the wood cellar, and I guess it was Lawrence Salazar, who does is the sort of master blender out there. She had made this, decision that, and I think it's sort of this, like an artist stand about something that she said, well, when I put all this time and effort into blending lawfully where I want it to be, and that's where I want it to stay. She wants it to turn, from being something dynamic to being something static. And at first, my gut reaction, the kind of brewer I was like, I don't know about that, But when you really hear the defense of it, that's like this is what they want it to be. Take a picture of it and then hang it on your wall. It's not going to keep developing, but she's put all this time and effort to make this beautiful thing, right? And this extraordinary thing, and that's the way she wants it to be. So I don't think it would be dishonest in any way to, if you were to pasteurize this beer, maybe you keg it or something like that, and then you could play with doing some back sweetening on it, or whatever else you want to do.
Or a much easier way, if you're a lazy home brewer like me, is pour yourself half a glass of this and half a glass of something else from your kegerator. And just do a blend in the glass, and that would really let you know every time. Or blend half the glass and do it one way, and blend the other half of the bottle with something else, and really use it as a learning experience to figure out what works and what doesn't work, or what ratio completely wipes out the sourness, or
because it can be really hard to when you're putting together. You can try in your grist bill to put together something where you think, I'm gonna mash high, I'm gonna put in a lot of what you think are gonna be unfermentables or whatever, but it's after a year with these mixed cultures, it can be really hard to keep body. Sometimes you get a nice perception of body, even if one of these beers finishes incredibly low. Maybe a couple gravity points left. Sometimes there is a perception of a sweetness.
And honestly,
even
this
if it's not
beer
there,
beer finished about 004, and it actually doesn't, to me anyway, taste quite that dry. Certainly dry beer, but even the plain version. And part of that is Saison yeast, which is what the base strain for this was, makes a lot of glycerin. And glycerin really helps with body. And that's one of the reasons, like 3711 French Saison, even when it finishes at 1.002, can have a little bit of body to it. Can have a little, not sweetness, but it's not thin.
Yeah.
So, Mike, you said that you can reveal a few more details on your professional endeavors at this point. You were pretty tight-lipped last time, but there have been some developments.
So I talked to the guy who's running this thing, Jacob McKean, and he said that we're just about that point now where we can really start talking about it. It's going to be in San Diego proper.
Oh.
And San Diego has a really dense, terrific local beer scene, but a lot of those places, Stone, Lost Abbey, Alpine, are out. They're out off in the suburbs somewhere. Mm-hmm. And his plan is, and he's been looking at sites and is sort of narrowing it down on a couple, is to have it somewhere that really is accessible. Not, I mean, like the Gaslight District is right downtown. I don't think that's what it's going to be. But it's going to be sort of in an area that where it's walkable to a lot of residential places, and have a tasting room and a 30-barrel brew house. So this is a pretty big, serious brewery as far as I can tell. And at the moment, his main goal seems to be to convince me to move out there and work for him full time.
It's always sunny, right? Always sunny.
Every time I talk to him, he just goes, "Oh, I just got back from running on the beach. It's beautiful out here today." In the middle of February.
The real hard sell.
Yeah.
That perfect weather just gets old.
Yeah. You just
I'm
get tired
sure.
of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, well,
Modern Times Brewing, or Modern Times Beer. There's a website that I can pull up amazingly quickly as I talk about this. But my role, at least to start, is going to be as a consultant. And so I'm helping him. So it's moderntimesbeer.com. And at the moment, it's a real skeleton website, but there is a mailing list that you can sign up for.
Get on board early.
Yeah. And so I've been helping him sort of work on some recipes. I've got a sort of an amberish IPA I just put on tap that I'm trying out for him that's got Nelson Sauvin hops and a ton of them and Simcoe and real sort of bold, aromatic, but not super, super bitter kind of thing. And we're going to be doing a whole lot of sours, and we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff. Sadly, he's I guess the paperwork's just about done to start fundraising. We are probably, depending on how fundraising comes in, maybe a year from now going to be, putting beer out. Probably the optimistic, best case scenario.
Well, that's pretty good.
Dollars and wants to call him, feel free. I'd really appreciate it.
Do we get a finder's fee if we find your
You certainly get a couple
Daddies?
Yeah.
Now, right?
Yeah. What do they call it? The angel? What do they call the? That'd be awesome. It'd be an excellent excuse to revisit San Diego.
I'm telling you.
Yeah, and so the plan at the moment is that I will be, hopefully, once it gets up and running, maybe I'll take a little time off work and sort of go out there and get things set up and get the barrels going, and then maybe just fly out there 4 or 5 times a year for a week of blending and brewing and, tastings and whatever. And then maybe a couple of years down the line, depending on how things are going and if my girlfriend Audrey can find a job out there, we'll see where it goes.
Wow. Well, we wish you the best of luck, of course. What do you guys think? What's your favorite beer of the night?
Oh, the Amarillo beer was the best for me.
Couldn't have predicted that. Steve?
I'm going to go with the last beer, the Acorn Squash beer. However, I will say that when I first tasted it, it was my least favorite. And so they're all three really excellent beers. I didn't like the third beer at first. The first sip, I was like, eh. But I think it's because of coming off those really sour, and the flavors in this third beer are much more subtle for me. And so it took me a while for my palate to adjust. But now that it has, I really like this beer a lot.
Yeah. Alex?
Yeah, I was going to say the third one until I just poured another glass of the Amarillo, and I think it's definitely my favorite. Like Steve was saying, the third one was a little more subtle, and I kind of like the, smack you around a little bit.
I don't know. I guess I'm going to split the decision because I like the spicy acorn squash beer. I like the aroma of the spices. I mean, I like the Amarillo as well, and just the base beer.
Well, yeah, they're all great.
But I like the spices. The spices play well with the sourness, and they are kind of separate. They're not blended in with they don't meld with the sourness. It's kind of a different upper level. So I don't know.
Right. So
I'm interested to see how the spices change or fade or integrate. These beers are still relatively young. We balled these maybe 3 months ago or so.
Yeah.
And so they're. I mean, we're probably at the tail end of the Amarillo one at this point. It's starting to fade a little.
Yeah.
It still actually tastes fine, but it's not as quite as bright and fresh as it was.
But it was a good experiment in sort of cold extracting of spices. Like we still got a good bit of character, and was done way post fermentation, and like really on the tail end of things. And you can still make this completely new and interesting beer. And just do it. And try something new.
And particularly, I mean, if you have a beer that I won't say it's like a real, if a beer goes unintentionally sour and really tastes terrible, something like this won't fix it. But if you have a beer that just the balance isn't quite right, or you don't love the aroma, I mean, play with a couple of these things. I mean, get a couple of 1-gallon jugs and try these things out and see what works for your beer. And this is really sort of the artistry of brewing. This isn't the technical part. This is trying to learn what flavors match, what techniques are going to get you
and
the best
it was
result.
just an idea. We just kicked it around and just tried it out, and luckily it worked.
Yeah, I think that not everybody's going to have the resources of the time or the energy to play with a barrel, but I think the last thing that you said there is something that everybody can apply. If you've got, say, a keg of beer that you want to play with, draw off a gallon of it and put it in a gallon jug. Dry hop it or dry spice it or play with it. You don't have to have a barrel to do these things. You can have a keg or a carboy or whatever.
And some oak cubes.
Yeah, or that too. Yeah.
No, and even though Nathan and I, between us now, have 4 barrels, we still have most of our sour beers in carboys and better bottles and oak cubes and all those things. And they make beers that are nearly as good, if not just as good.
Yeah.
And particularly if you haven't been doing this for a long time, don't risk a 60-gallon barrel of beer. I mean, it's a lot of investment in time and effort.
And now there's all these different wood products. There's spirals. You've got
staves.
You've got all different kinds of things to play with, and you're gonna find the sweet spot for you. Like how much oak character do you like, and then maybe do you soak it in some kind of spirit or wine or whatever else for some period of time. And there's just just so many options out there.
Wow. Well, this has been exciting. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm glad that everybody got to come this time.
I'm very glad I got to come. And now I'm really sorry that I missed last time.
Oh, those last beers were awful.
Oh, they were terrible.
You didn't miss anything. Just don't listen to that other show.
Did they have a brewed on date and it told you when it was cold enough to pour?
Yeah, yeah. Some like the nation's capital appeared on the 750 milliliter bottle when it was cold enough to drink. Well, guys, Mike and Nathan, I can't thank you enough. Again, thanks for sending these out, and best of luck to both of you. And I can't wait till next time.
Yeah, no, maybe in another 8 months or something we can do sort of Nathan and I are both well on our way to actually being brewers.
Yeah, totally, absolutely, yeah. Thanks, gang. Really appreciate it. Absolutely.
Well, thanks again to Mike, Nathan, Steve, Alex, and Andy. And by the way, Andy's the owner of our local homebrew shop here in Northwest Arkansas, and you can find Andy's shop at thehomebrewery.com. And we appreciate everything that Andy does for us. We wish Mike and Nathan all the best of luck with their upcoming professional ventures, and we look forward to all the good stuff that must come of that. Always a pleasure to talk to and learn from those guys in our nation's capital. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site, along with our Brewer's Logbook, which is now available to order. We got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are It's All About the Bike, The Pursuit of Happiness on Two Wheels, and Japanese Hori Hori Garden Landscaping Digging Tool with carbon steel blade and sheath. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. And don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by our buddy Kelly Dotson down in Austin, Texas. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.